Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of the meeting today. On my right is Becky Eads, who is the head of Planning and Development Services. On my left is Jane Mellor, who's a democracy officer. To the left again is Sandra Brannigan, who's the senior solicitor. And to my right again, we have the development officer and other officers who will be relevant to the main agenda item. I'll introduce you properly when we get to that agenda item. Just in terms of housekeeping, first of all, if I could just ask that everybody checks that their phones are turned off or on silent. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the alarm does go off, we leave the building by the nearest exit and we'll usher you all out. Toilets are through the doors behind me. Members of the committee, please don't go to the toilet during the item, but anybody else is welcome to do so. I think that is all the introductions. I just, before we start the meeting properly, want to address some comments that were made at full council, at the most recent meeting of full council, where it was inferred that a decision of this committee was a reflection of a policy position of the administration. Just to be completely clear, this committee is not political. Decisions that are made by this committee have no reflection of anything to do with the administration. The members of this committee should not be whipped. Indeed, it would be illegal for them to come into this meeting with a predetermined position. And so members have all been reminded by the monitoring officer that it is really, really important that we maintain that distinction for this committee. Decisions are only made on planning basis. So with that said, this is a business meeting of the council which is held in public as opposed to being a public meeting. There are specific sections where there can be public participation, and when we reach those points I'll invite members of the public to come and address the committee. But if I can ask those members of the public not to seek to interact with members of the committee at any other point during the meeting. We actually only have one agenda item on today's committee, with agenda item 3B having been withdrawn by the applicant. I need to just give a couple of sets of apologies and then we can crack on with the main business of the meeting. So today, Councillor Eyre has sent apologies and is being substituted by Councillor Widdowson, and Councillor Kelly has sent apologies and is being substituted by Councillor Melly. So, agenda item 1 is declarations of interest. Has anybody got anything that they need to declare in relation to today's agenda? Not seeing anything, so I can move us on to agenda item 2, which is the general remit public participation for the committee. We've not had anybody register under that section, which means we can crack on straight away to agenda item 3, which is the plans list, and agenda item 3A. Just for the benefit of anybody watching, the way that this committee operates is that we first of all ask the officers to talk through the plans and provide any updates. Committee members are then asked if they have any questions on specifically related to the plans. We then move to public participation on the plan item, and there'll be members of the public wanting to make comments. Members can then ask questions to those members of the public, and then after that we then can ask questions on the general reports to any of the officers present. We then move into debate before then testing the officer recommendation, and if the officer recommendation falls, we then consider any other way that we want to deal with the application. So I will just introduce now Neil Massey, who's the development officer for this particular item. We have Emma Tyndall from Public Protection with us, and we also have Ian Stokes from Highways and Principal Development Control Engineer available for any questions. But if I could first of all ask Becky to introduce the plans.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for a full planning application for the erection of 139 dwellings with associated landscaping and infrastructure at land to the east of Millfield Industrial Estate, Main Street, Wheldrake. So this is the draft local plan allocation. You can see, just see if you see my pointer here, the allocation is this red box here. This is the aerial image of us. You can see the site is where my red cursor is here. And this is the site plan. You can just see again, red line here. So this is a site location plan, red line to the road, existing industrial estates, you can see here, and surrounding neighbouring properties. So this is a proposed site location plan. Access off Main Street here, through into the site, mixture of dwellings with public open space here, landscaping to the rear of the site. And as I said, mixture of dwellings throughout. That's the parking layout. You can see there's a mixture of parking spaces and where they are proposed as part of the development. That's a highways adoption plan. And again, house types. There's a mixture of house types, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, all 2-storey. And that's it in terms of your presentation. I'll go back to that one because it's the most useful one. We have had a late representation, which has been received in email to members to note. It doesn't raise anything that isn't already covered within the report. I'm going to pass you to Neil for the further update.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of since the application report was written, we've had 2 objections from occupiers of the industrial estate. I presume they're the owners and the occupiers of 2 units, outlining concerns that they feel the acoustic fence won't be sufficient to address noise concerns, and concern that they'll impact on the houses and that'll impact on their ability to function and expand as industrial units. In terms of the conditions and recommendation, the recommendation is still as in the report, although in terms of the obligations, there's one point in terms of where it said management agreement for open spaces to be part of a planning obligation. That's been widened out to clarify that this includes play equipment, landscaping, boundaries, acoustic boundaries, and so forth. There's a few additions to the conditions. Condition 2 has just been slightly altered for clarity to refer to roof types. Condition 4, it just clarifies that the surface is not just hard surfacing, but might apply to soft surfacing. Condition 13 relates to the erection of an acoustic fence. It's just clarified the 2.6 metres is the height measured from the actual industrial estate land rather than the application site. And then condition 25, method of works, has just put a line in there to tighten it up in terms of enforceability. And that's it, thank you.
Okay, so do members have any questions on the specifics of the site plan or the plans list? Councillor Woodby.
Thank you, Chair. So at the site visit yesterday, Monday, it was mentioned about soundproofing the houses. So I was just wondering how many of the houses would be soundproofed, and then does the conditions, I know it's the planning, but it is kind of the same question. With the conditions, it does cover all the noise from both of the structures that are making the noise, and they're covered in 13 and 14 and 31 and 30.
Right. Yes, in terms of the soundproof, which would be effectively double glazed windows, no additional ventilation if needed, if they feel at some time of the day they can't open the windows, which I say Emma would come into that in more detail. But it would be, in terms of condition 14 outlines, it's 1 to 27 plots and 39 to 41, which is effectively, that's right. The left.
So it's a whole.
It's that whole area on the
Okay.
left hand side there, and also slightly beyond where Becky's showing, just down those houses there as well on the corner.
Okay.
So it's those houses there.
And sorry, but what about the smell? Are you going to be doing anything with the smell?
The applicant has agreed that there is occasional, depending on what's being cooked and the wind and so forth, that there can be smells from the unit. And the actual applicant said they'd pay for a ventilation system. At the moment, I don't think there is a ventilation system, or if it is, it's not very advanced. So they'll pay for a new one, and the actual quality of it would be agreed with us before it's put in to make sure it addresses any concerns in terms of odours.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further questions on the plans? Okay, Councillor Merritt, I saw you first, then Councillor Melly.
Continuing on the noise issues, can I ask, has the noise assessment taken into account?
Sorry, Councillor Merritt. What I'd like to do after this is just questions on the specific details of the plans. We then go to the public speakers. There's then an opportunity to get into the detail of the mitigations or the issues around sound and what have you. We've got public protection here, and I think we probably will want to go into that in some detail. Yes. But if we can just hold your fire for a minute, if that's okay. Councillor Melly, was yours on the specific details of the plans?
Yes. Yes, because I wasn't able to attend the site visits on Monday, so I just want to make sure I understand where the concerns for the sound are coming from. Was that on that screen we're just on with the plans? Was that the top left side of the screen?
If we go back to the site plan, yeah, that's That's Millfield Industrial Estate where the cursor's going, and so it's basically, there's several industrial units along there. One produces foods, another one marble work surface, kitchen work surfaces, so forth. There's nothing taking place. There's car related uses. So pretty much all the industrial use along that side have the potential to create some degree of noise, and there has been monitoring of that noise over the past year or two to try and assess what the levels are, what the nature of the noise is, and can it be attenuated in terms of a way that would allow the houses to be where they are in relation to that and not lead to nuisance or significant complaint.
Just because in this additional information we've been provided, it says that there's been complaints regarding noise from existing homes to the east of the application site. So that's on the opposite side of the site. That's where
one of the persons said that previously there have been complaints from people, across the field. I mean, I don't think that they're recent complaints, but one of the occupiers of the industrial estate has said that, yes.
Okay. No further questions, I think, on the specifics of the plans. So I will move us on to the public speakers. So we've got 3 people registered to speak today. The first person I have registered is Susie Mercer. So if you'd like to come to the table now, Susie, and I'll just welcome you back, because former councillor, and I think you previously sat on the planning committee as well, so some time ago. So you will know that you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'm sure that you will be absolutely spot on 3 minutes, but I will give you a heads up if I think you're running over time. But if you'd like to start in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Susie Mercer. I have been a resident of Wheldrake for almost 30 years. I am a former ward councillor and past sheriff for the city. I am currently a trustee for the Wheldrake Recreation Association, the WRA. I object to the proposed application as Wheldrake is situate on sea roads, all of which are not adequate for the current level of transport that we have to endure. And the inevitable increase in traffic that this development will create will undoubtedly become intolerable. The school is unable to expand any further due to the constraints of its boundaries. Our drainage system is at capacity, with surface water periodically having to be tankered away to avoid sewage flowing into the Ings. The only remaining pub is now up for lease, as the current lessee is unable to make a living. There is a coffee shop at the other end of the village to the pub, which is only open infrequently, as the proprietor has taken a unit at the designer centre. The bus service is woefully inadequate and not user-friendly for those that might want to use it to journey to and from employment anywhere outside of the village. The noise and smells from the industrial estate will inevitably lead to complaints from the new occupants, as there have been complaints previously from dwellings not nearly as close as the proposed properties will be. However, if it is the committee's decision to approve this application, could I, on behalf of the WRA, draw your attention to item 3.50 under lifelong learning and leisure, citing the Open Space and Green Infrastructure Update September 2017, which shows that the ward has a shortfall of outdoor sports provisions. The suggested beneficiaries for the outdoor sports element being Wheldrake Sports Club in Wheldrake and the Lower Derwent Sports and Social Club in Elvington, and or another sports project within a 15 to 20 minute walking distance or within 30 minutes on public transport of the development. There are no sports facilities within a 15 to 20 minute walk of the proposed development other than Wheldrake Sports Club, or due to the lack of an inadequate bus service, is it possible to travel to any other facility within 30 minutes and return by the same mode? And certainly not on a Sunday when there is no service at all. The WRA have been fundraising for a multi-use games area, Mugger, for some time. A facility that would benefit all ages and all abilities and would be accessible year round. We are hopeful of starting phase 1 of the project shortly. It will take another 2 phases to complete, and we will continue our fundraising efforts to that end. Our sports fields are on clay and desperately in need of drainage to make them playable all year round. We have recently lost our senior football team due to the state of the playing fields, and we are hopeful of their return when the drainage is remedied. We will continue our fundraising efforts for our future plans. However, could I please, on behalf of the WRA, kindly ask the committee's consideration to awarding all of the contribution monies to the WRA.
If you could
Wheldrake is
start
the
wrapping
village.
up now, thank you.
Sorry?
If you could just start wrapping up now, you're over your 3 minutes.
Wheldrake is the village that will be most affected by the proposed development and is more than likely the venue that most of the new occupants would choose to use when seeking local sporting and recreation facilities for themselves and their families. I hope that you are able to look favourably upon our request. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. And members, are there any questions? Councillor Nelson.
Just a really quick one. Does this mean that you've already established a site for the mugger if you can raise the funds for it?
Yes, we have a 3-court tennis courts, but unfortunately the third court has crumbled. So we're looking to do it over the 3 tennis courts and progress that. So we do have a plan, and as I say, we're hoping to start phase 1 very shortly, but obviously it's a lot of money. Excuse me.
Councillor Widdowson.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your 3 minutes. I don't know what we're supposed to call it. Just 2 questions. Can you just repeat? There is no bus service on a Sunday.
There is no bus service on a Sunday.
Okay, no bus service on a Sunday, and the only leisure facility for sports and recreation in Wheldrake is the WRA.
Yes.
Okay, just to make sure I got that right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, it's a question that's probably for officers, but directly relevant to that point. So I don't know if you want it now or later.
If it's a question for officers, if you can just hold it, make a note of it, and I will come to you as soon as, well, I'll come to Councillor Merritt first for his question to officers, and then I'll come to you afterwards. I'll make a note. Okay, were there any further questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for your time this evening. Our next public speaker is Councillor Vassy, who's the ward councillor. If you'd like to come to the table, and as you will be well aware, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a heads up when you've got about 30 seconds left. And start.
Thank you, Chair. Well, here we are gathered around a table as elected members to shape our common future for the benefit of residents in Wheldrake and across the city. In 3 minutes, I can't possibly set out what I've learned about how to tweak all the conditions. I'll be relying on you to ask me questions. I do not dispute the need for more housing. The issue is how to ensure this proposal and its associated conditions meet our declared objectives. The National Planning Policy Framework says in paragraph 7, the objective of sustainable development can be summarised as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It declares the social objective to support strong, vibrant, healthy communities with accessible services that reflect current and future needs and support communities' health. If approved without amendment to the conditions, this proposal will, I believe, fail to meet many of the objectives of the NPPF. It falls short on access to health services, supporting strong and healthy communities, meeting the needs of present and future generations, mitigating climate change, protecting biodiversity, and promoting sustainable transport. The NPPF states that strategic policies should set out an overall strategy to make sufficient provision for community facilities, such as health. Paragraph 22 says strategic policies should look ahead to anticipate and respond to long-term requirements and opportunities, such as those arising from major improvements in infrastructure. Where larger scale developments, such as significant extensions to existing villages, form part of that strategy, policies should be set within a vision that looks at least 30 years ahead. Wheldrake is a village of 1,800 people. As you've heard, it has a rubbish bus service, no safe cycling path to connect it to York or anywhere else, no primary care practice, no pharmacy, no dentist. And if this is approved without modification, you'll be adding 500 more people and 200 more cars to that. The Section 106 conditions could address this if we do it correctly, if you do the right thing. You can ensure there is a large enough health contribution to create a doctor's practice in the village. You can connect the village to the city with proper public transport and a safe cycle network. You can ensure the development cuts carbon emissions and congestion rather than adding to it. You can ensure a habitat for wild birds, swifts, hedgehogs, and other animals. Having spoken at length with all manner of experts and learned from them, I'm happy to tell you how much is needed and how it needs to be spent. I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, just going to say you've got 30 seconds left, but you've come to the end of your time already. So thank you for that. And members, do you have any questions for Councillor Bassey? Councillor Widdowson.
Councillor Bassey, thank you. And I'm impressed it was 30 seconds short.
Oof.
Very impressed. So what you've said is there's currently 1,800 people and this will be a 25%, 30% increase.
Yes.
Where, given what the previous speaker said about the constraints within Wheldrake with the school, that it hasn't a way to expand, are you aware of sites where you could put a GP, where you could put a dentist, where you could put those primary primary health care provision?
I am aware that discussion has happened. Over the past 2 years, I've had many meetings with NHS managers on this. Members may be aware that when the pandemic started, Wheldrake surgery was closed and it never reopened. At a stroke, everyone in Wheldrake has to get in a private car to go to the doctors, at least 4 miles. There's no alternative. There isn't a bus. The bus, if you take a bus from Wheldrake to Elvington, you will have to wait there 2, 3, 4 hours to get a bus back. There are only 5 buses a day. So what the NHS suggested when I had their discussions with them was that with a funding, Section 106 funding of about 300,000, then the NHS would be able to put in an equivalent sum, and then the process could begin to find a practice to transform the fortunes of Wheldrake Village. I think it's needed anyway, but when you're going to add another 140 homes, 139 homes, it becomes even more important. When we're committed to cutting carbon emissions from transport by 70% by 2030, is it acting in the spirit of the NPPF to then say, we're going to create a situation where everyone in this village has to continue getting into a car to access primary care to get to a pharmacy? I don't believe it is. I know that there have been preliminary discussions about how much it might cost to create a new pharmacy. There have been thoughts about where one might be situated, but for that to develop further, I think it requires some commitment from the city, from the local authority to say, we think that actually this is what should be happening. A village of this size should have a pharmacy and a doctor's practice within walking distance.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Hollier and then Councillor Stewart.
Thanks. You've mentioned there should be some amendments to the conditions, but I don't think you've said what they should be. Could you just outline what those amendments you're seeking are?
Well, yeah, thank you. Yes, the first one I think would be the contribution of 174,000 to Elvington Medical Practice. Essentially, that puts the money 4 miles away, rather than investing in the village to transform the fortunes of the village, looking forwards 30 years, as we've said. So my first thing would be, I think that there should be £300,000 involved in that. Think about it, 139 homes at about £300,000 each. This is £42 million of development we're talking about here. I don't think it's unreasonable that we should seek to have a medical practice in a village of this size. The second thing I'd say relates to what the first public speaker said about contributions for sport and recreation. Paragraph 3.5 in your report says beneficiaries should be within 30 minutes on public transport of the development. As you've heard, on a Sunday, there is no public transport at all. Even on weekdays, there's negligible public transport, which isn't to disrespect the buses that come through. There just aren't enough of them. So I would strongly recommend that that money shouldn't be just going into a pot to be put miles away. If we're serious about tackling climate change, if we're serious about the NPPF and sustainable communities, that money should be spent in Wheldrake. The third thing I would say is on transport. This recommendation includes, or your recommendations include £70,000 to support peak time bus services. That's not going to Wheldrake. We only have one peak time bus at the moment. That's just money going into a pot. Are we serious about sustainable travel? We've got 25,000 quid for a residential travel plan, but where are the buses that people are going to catch? So I would say all of that, or most of that, should be ring-fenced to improve bus services in Wheldrake, between Wheldrake and York, Wheldrake and Elvington, nearby communities, so that people have an alternative to using a car. I could talk at length about the cycling thing. It would be great if that cycling money was going to create our cycle path. Most of you will be aware that a cycle path between Wheldrake and Heslington has been designed by Sustrans. Money was put aside 4 years ago. It hasn't been spent to develop it. Everything in the report talks only about cycling within the development and how you can be sustainable. Sustainability in cycling isn't about just going to your neighbours. And in Wheldrake Village, I've tried for 4 years to get officers to draw up plans to put cycle racks at the cafe and the village shop. We haven't even managed that. So if we're serious about cycling, if we're serious about sustainable transport, I'm not opposed to the development, but I urge you to think about how you benefit this community for the next 30 years. The last thing, and well, in context, I note this. The conditions put an off-site contribution of £300,000 for 2 traveller spaces. I'm not at all opposed to traveller spaces. It doesn't say where they're going to be, but I also note that's £300,000 for 2 pitches. That £300,000 or equivalent could be the contribution that kickstart getting a medical practice in the village of Wheldrake. The last 2 things I'll say, and I know I've gone on at length.
Yeah, I am going to ask you to be quite tolerant.
I am aware of
the question of, would you like to elaborate as long as possible on everything you'd like to say, which I'm sort of happy with, but if you can just be succinct in your summing up.
I will just make 2 other comments, Chair. Thank you for indulging me. On biodiversity, I think every single building should have a swift brick as a matter of course. They only cost 100 quid. And there should be hedgehog highways installed in all fences. In Wheldrake, there are swifts and house martins and swallows and hedgehogs, and they need to be encouraged. And the last thing is about car clubs. There's provision in here for 1 place. I think there should be provision for 4 places with electric charging offered as a matter of course to encourage people not to own cars and to share the benefits of car. Those are the areas that I would see changing, and thank you for your question.
Okay, and I think there was one question from Councillor Stewart, which I hope is a maybe less open-ended question.
Hopefully there's maybe more questions than just one there. Sure. But so obviously there's a spectrum of object to approve in terms of where people sit, and when I read your comments, you were sort of objecting, but not the strongest ever. And then obviously you talked about the conditions that you'd like to see, and you're down on a speaking objection. Would it be fair to say that if we take everything you said, you know, Mr. Tate's happy with it, and those are all conditioned, you would actually be recommending approval, or is it you'd still be recommending objection?
That's a fair question. I think I would be recommending approval. I recognise that we need more homes in York. And as I go around the village and talk to residents, I think they recognise that too. What they're passionate about is making sure that it's good for the future. As the NPPF says, give us a development that addresses the challenges of this generation and the next, and let's move on. But if it's just the way it is, most of those benefits are not going to Wheldrake.
Okay, thank you. And then obviously when the report was put together, it was talking about, well, you in your comments talked about 150 houses being too many and 2 dens. Now we're at 139. Is that okay for you, or would you actually come down further? And the other question I've got is, obviously you said stuff about the medical provision and everything like that, which, you know, is one thing, but do you think you might be going too far in terms of the contribution you're expecting this one development, you know, is it 10% of the village or something like that, if it was to do in terms of transport? Because I'm just, you know. It's
more like 18, there are 800 homes in Wheldrake, so adding 139 is more than 10%. I am very much aware that officers have listened to a lot of the objections that have been made. And there are constructive changes between when things were first presented in November 21, I think, that's when I first wrote. I noticed there is an open space now. I notice a lot of things that have happened, and that's good. My plea is simply that the conditions need to make sure we get proper benefits. I'm not objecting this for the sake of it, and I think most people in the village know that we need more homes.
Okay, I think there was a final question from Councillor Widdowson. Oh, sorry, I see Councillor Melly as well, so, but Councillor Widdowson, on you go.
Okay, do you have a rough ballpark figure for how much the cycle pass will cost to connect it to York?
How much?
The cycle pass, with all the work that's been done by Sustrans and everything else, do you just
What
ballpark?
What I know is this, that Sustrans produced a detailed report last year. Originally, officers thought it would be about £600,000. Sustrans produced a detailed report that would link Elvington to Wheldrake to Heslington, and they said it would cost about £2 million. But what's important about that is that in that report, which was 150 pages long and full of plans, they said if the City Council spent £200,000 buying all the land and sorting out all the legal agreements so that a shovel-ready scheme was there, then the plan could go ahead. And that Sustrans report was produced for the Department of Transport. So my position is that if the council shows willing, I believe the government will make this happen. And I think it's worth the candle.
Okay, and Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also noticed that the Section 106 agreement was suggesting money towards peak time bus services, and I had that down as a question for officers, but since you brought it up, I would appreciate some more of your knowledge about what bus services currently exist, and if you know anything about which ones are at risk and need supporting, or whether funding could go into, extending services, that sort of thing.
The real challenge for buses is this. Before I was elected in 2019, I was working in the city and I was going into town in and out by bus. The day I was elected, I had to buy a car because I couldn't be a councillor without having a private car. The last bus is at 6 o'clock. There are 5 buses through the day. On a Sunday, there's no buses at all. I know people, residents who move to Wheldrake and say we moved because it's got a bus service, because in Elvington, it's even worse. But if we want to drive a change, a modal shift towards public transport, it has to exist. And I think if you imagine the kind of sums we're talking about, we have a weekend bus service on a Friday and a Saturday, and there's a bus coming back at 11 o'clock on a Friday and Saturday night. It regularly has 35 people on it. People really appreciate being able to go into town and come back on public transport. If this money that's being set aside could have a bus at 7 o'clock, if this money could make sure there was a bus on a Sunday, we could help drive the change that I think most of us want to see.
So are there currently peak time bus services that adding more residents might help support, but it's the off-peak times that that the services don't currently exist?
There's one peak time bus service Monday to Saturday at 6 o'clock, and that's it.
Okay.
And there's not much before it and nothing after it. In the middle of the day, there are gaps. And I regularly have residents say to me, well, if there was more than, there's 3 buses here between, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because now I have to go everywhere in my car, between 8 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And then there's nothing until 6 o'clock. And it's having someone look at that and rationalizing it to make it easier for people to make better choices.
And sorry, Chair, the bus services that do exist, are they just backwards and forwards between the town centre and Wheldrake, or do they serve other villages?
They serve other villages. So one of them comes through Elvington, through Wheldrake, and through to York. The other one comes from Holm on Spalding Moor and through all the villages, Thorganby, through there, and eventually reaches Wheldrake and then gets through to York. So they do serve more communities. And there is again an opportunity for York to work more closely with East Riding to ensure that that's further improved. And there's a great appetite for it, not only within City of York boundary, but I also get communications from parish councils beyond Wheldrake, beyond Elvington, in Sutton on Derwent and Thorganby, saying, can you help extend this?
Okay, I think one last one, Councillor Manny.
Thank you, Chair. One of the comments submitted by, I think, a member of the public was about loss of agricultural land. Do you know what this land is currently used for? Does it serve an agricultural purpose, or is it just vacant, waiting for development?
That is, well, some of, as I know it, going past it, I think some of it is agricultural land and some of it is not. Is there a shortage of agricultural land in Wheldrake? Wheldrake is surrounded by agricultural land. If the concerns that I've seen that have more substance, I think, are the references to wildlife and ground nesting birds and things like that, that this will possibly impact on. And it's important to consider that because we're next to the Lower Derwent Valley and a triple SI. But I see that officers have put in conditions about ensuring that dog walking is directed away from those areas, and I welcome that.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much for your time, Councillor Bassier.
Thank you, Chair.
It was helpful to get your local knowledge, but that was quite some epic questioning there, I think. Right, final speaker that we have this evening is Liam Tate, who is the applicant in support of the application. So as with previous speakers, Mr. Tate, you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then there may be members that want to.
I'll do my best to top that passionate speech. Good afternoon, members. Thank you for letting me support in this application and your officer's recommendation for approval. I wanted to say a few words as the applicant, Barrett David Wilson Homes, but your officers have already provided quite a comprehensive report, so I won't go into too much detail. The application site is a residential allocation within the council's emerging local plan, having consistently been identified as suitable for development in various iterations of the plan over the years. The development will comprise a range of house types, including 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom properties, 30% of which are designated as affordable, and 5% is designated as self or custom build properties in line with the council's emerging policy. The scheme provides a large area of open space, including a playground and areas for general amenity, final detail of which will be submitted for discussion and agreement in due course. These areas will be maintained by a private management company, which will ensure the long-term management of them and regular inspections of play equipment, for example. As your officers have explained, the site is sandwiched between residential development to the east and Wheldrake industrial estate to the west. We fully appreciate that we need to ensure that the impacts are minimised and careful consideration has been given to the relationship of both. Mitigation is proposed to ensure that the existing uses remain unaffected. Substantial noise monitoring has been undertaken, some of which under the supervision of the council's own environmental health officer at appropriate times throughout the week. A series of mitigation measures are proposed. I would draw the members' views to condition 13, which requires a 2.6 metre acoustic fence to be erected along the boundary. This will be erected prior to occupation of any properties and will be again maintained by the management company in perpetuity. We acknowledge local residents have raised concerns regarding access arrangements and additional traffic through the village. But as your officers have explained, a comprehensive comprehensive transport assessment has been undertaken, which has looked at the highway capacity and safety of key junctions, for example. Members will also note from the officer report the application will secure provision of significant contributions to provide additional infrastructure across the village. Contributions totaling circa £1.5 million. These will be put towards expansion of Elvington Doctor's Surgery, for example, and the local primary school, and also will be put towards the bus service to increase it from an hourly service to a twice hourly service for a number of years.
We've got about 30 seconds left.
So in summary, site is earmarked for development. It's fully compliant with national and local policy, will deliver much needed affordable housing and will deliver much needed contributions towards infrastructure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I can see a number of questions. I'm just going to indulge myself by asking the first question whilst I remember it, and then I will come to Councillor Fisher and then Councillor Nelson. But you mentioned the management company that will be covering the fence, and I think also there's a management company to cover the park and the maintenance of the park as well.
Yeah.
Could you just tell us what you'll do to ensure that the social housing isn't made unaffordable by virtue of additional fees that there might be? I know some developments waive the fees for the social housing. Is that something that you're considering, or what?
It's
can
all
you do?
part of the Section 106 agreement that the affordable units don't pay contribution or pay an equivalent contribution towards the management of the maintenance areas, if you like, the main publicly maintained areas. I don't have the figures to hand in terms of what each individual unit would pay. For example, apartments would pay slightly more because there's more areas to maintain. And then obviously number of bedrooms, for example, they pay different amounts of money, but that would all be set out in the Section 106 agreement, agreed with the council, of course.
Sure. So just for complete clarity, then you're quite happy in a negotiation of that part of the 106 agreement that the management fees will be reduced appropriately in the areas where there's social housing.
We need to look at that. Like I said, I don't have those figures to hand in terms of what we'd be asking for any of the properties, but we can certainly look at that in response. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I saw Councillor Fisher's hand. Oh, was it Councillor Nelson's hand first? Sorry, I was obviously looking that way, but Councillor Nelson, and then I'll come to Councillor Fisher.
I'm Chair. You mentioned about how some of the Section 106 money would be going towards the local primary school.
Yeah.
But from maybe I've misread the papers. I was under the impression that it wasn't going towards the primary school because it was deemed that that wasn't an acceptable ask, and that no money would be going to the primary school, but money would be going to secondary schools and early years provision.
Sorry, that's typo on my part. So we are providing contribution towards upgrading schools effectively. The primary school is, I think some public record has got additional capacity. So we've not been asked to provide a contribution towards primary school places, but everything else, secondary school places, special needs places, nursery places, the contribution towards upgrading those areas. Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, that's an error on my part.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Yeah. Could you tell me how many of these houses will have heat pumps fitted from the start, and how many will have solar panels on the roofs, please?
Again, good question. As part of the new building regulations requirement, we have to ensure sufficient energy efficiency measures. We can look at a range of different things: solar panels, like you say, air source heat pumps, additional installation, thicker walls, for example. It's all in the mix. We have to do relevant calculations to demonstrate that we're hitting effectively the standards that are set through the building regs process. So at this stage, we haven't assessed the individual properties. That will be done post planning, and I think there's a condition there's a condition requiring submission of further information in that respect.
Because the reason I'm asking that is this is a greenfield site. It's therefore relatively low density. It's not like a city centre site where there might be 80 properties to the hectare. This is at about 35 properties to the hectare, 35.9.
Yeah.
There's plenty of space around there. You can also look at the orientation of the actual roofs and fit these ab initio, because the best time to put these resources in is when the house is built. Heat pumps don't work off the standard gas radiators. They need bigger radiators, and the best time to put them in is at the start. So please, will you look at that? Because we shouldn't be looking at minimum standards. We should be looking at sustainability on a very, very high level. I had the same complaint about the Eastfield Avenue site in Dunnington, which I believe is one of your sites. And I just think David Wilson should be looking at, your company should look at better standards. I was on an estate in another city, another town, looking at nearly every house had a heat pump on it, and it's a brand new development. Please look at this and try and raise your standards to get better standards of. We're in a housing crisis. A cost of living crisis. We've also got the issue of the climate crisis. I think you could be more ambitious with what you're doing rather than just hitting minimum standards.
Yeah, we do air source heat pumps. we've built very little in York as most developers have over the last however many years, but obviously new sites are coming forward, and it's something we are willing to look at as part of the overall scheme. So solar panels, you look at the properties and they've all got gabled roofs. That's intentional, both two reasons really, to reflect the character of Wheldrake, but also to enable solar panels. If you've got hips gabled roofs, obviously you then can't achieve the sufficient roof space to enable a solar panel. So the properties through the design process of the last 2 years have evolved to actually have gable for those two reasons. So I hear what you say, and it's something that will be picked up, not simply by myself, by my technical colleagues who look at the scheme as a whole, look at the installation values, and look at things like solar panels and air source heat pumps, and see what's most credible.
Did you have an additional? Yeah, I've seen
the other thing is we are facing an amazing crash in our wildlife populations, and one of the birds that is most affected are swifts. House martins similarly. House martins obviously require a sort of angled roof when you build in the V of it. But swifts are so simple to cope for. If you put a swift brick on a house, you'll get about 30% occupancy of them. Yeah. And swifts are incredibly crashing in numbers. Can you please look at that as a matter of urgency to put in swift bricks on as many houses as possible, because they do make an incredible difference towards preserving this species?
Absolutely. Again, I think there's a condition requiring us to submit measures such as that. Previous speaker mentioned hedgehog highways. They're standard across our developments now. Swift bricks again are pretty standard. They're not across all properties because you've got to locate them in appropriate locations. But as part of the scheme, we're providing a net gain in biodiversity. So we've assessed the current value of the site. We're going to provide a net gain in biodiversity value. So the things like swift bricks, hedgehog highways, additional landscaping, etc., will hopefully boost the biodiversity value of the site. But again, it's something we'll look at. And there's a condition requiring submission of information on that.
Okay, I had Councillor Steels-Walshaw next, then Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, it's a question about the schools, and it kind of follows on from what Councillor Nelson said. So there is going to be a contribution to the schools, but I just wondered how that calculation had been done and how we would know if it was enough to, because we heard previously that the primary school can't actually expand anymore. And I just wondered what the planning was behind that. And also within that, I know there's going to be a transport contribution within that, but that's going to have to result in more transport for children to travel to secondary schools, and if that was going to be enough, and if it would result in possibly more buses for the area.
The contribution.
I'm just going to interrupt a second. That's probably a question in a way that you want to put to officers as well. I will allow you to address the points that have been made there, but the way that the 106 works is that the officers make an assessment and then say, this is what we expect from the development. So the officers would be able to tell you how they came to the conclusions. But
that's exactly what I was going to say, to be honest. When we put a planning application in, your relevant consultee, so the education department will look at the local schools in the area, and they'll say there's sufficient provision or a deficit in provision for however many kids. They will then work out how many places are required over and above what's already provided. They'll then put a contribution amount to that. That's exactly what's happened in this instance. So they've told us that the secondary is oversubscribed, but the primary is undersubscribed. So they're requesting a contribution in relation to secondary, but not primary. So we have no say in terms of what contribution they ask for. And I think those figures are sent down by government in terms of what a school place. I think it's roughly 22,000 a place, something like that, give or take. But don't quote me on those figures. So it's not something we would calculate. It's your officers.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, few people are as close to doctors as they'd like, and I represent Copmanthorpe, where Bishopthorpe patients are coming because the surgery is going to close. But I was just wondering how close the sort of sums were between you funding Elvington surgery and this development being the start of, something in Wheldrake. Was it something that could be done with a bit more money, or was it just something that it just wouldn't stack up?
So we actually met with,
Again, I'm just going to interrupt
Sure.
slightly. In a way, that's also an officer question because it's the officers that make the assessment of this is what we can achieve. They'll speak to the NHS and say what's available in the area, what can we do, and then they will put a figure to the applicant to say this is what would make the application acceptable.
No, I understand that, but I think it's 174,000 goes to Elvington. So that's what the officers have said is the figure, presumably. But if it was to be something Wheldrake specific, how much would that be? And presumably you'd have, I don't believe would have a view on that. So that was why I thought it might be an applicant rather than officer.
I'm happy to hear the applicant's response, but I'm not sure whether the applicant would ever get to that point of that part of the decision making because it would be the officers who make the 106 request.
again, I'll just echo what you said. So we actually met with the NHS Trust, and we actually met with the doctor's surgery in Elvington, and they owned both practices at the time and made the operational decision to close the Wheldrake practice down. So we have no say about what doctors' surgeries are where. I think our preference would be to have a doctor's surgery in Wheldrake, but obviously that's not our decision. The sum amount has been derived from, again, similar to education, they've told us how many additional places will be required at Elvington doctor's surgery. They've then equated square footage to it in terms of how big they would need to expand the practice. They've then derived a figure to us when that's the figure that's been put to us, and that's what's the 174,000 contribution has been paid. So in response to the comments made by the previous speakers, it's completely out of our control where doctors go. The doctors made a passionate speech when we met them about it just wasn't sustainable to have two practices so close together. So the operation decision was made to close the Wheldrake practice down. That's the situation.
Okay, and Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. In terms of what you've sort of just picking up on what you said about building regs changing and requiring a certain amount of energy efficiency and swift bricks and all of those things. I wondered if you had if there's a figure or maybe like a percentage or a proportion that we could work to. What I'm thinking really is it's really great that you're saying, yes, we're looking at heat pumps or we'll look at solar panels and that's something that we will consider, or we will consider swift bricks and things like that. But obviously, things that don't make it into conditions, it's kind of up to you what you do. It's great that you're showing that that kind of positivity. But if we were so inclined to say, I don't know, a percentage of the houses had swift bricks, or what are the building regs kind of saying? And in general with swifts, what sort of proportion would we be looking at? You know, you said that you don't need, for example, a swift brick on every house. How many do you need?
You don't need. It's not the case you don't need them. It's the case they just don't. They're not feasible because swifts only they fly in certain patterns. Sure. So there's no point having one in the central part of the site. They tend to be on the edges. But that's for an ecologist to tell us where best to locate them and how many to locate. Like I said, there's a condition in terms of ecologists, the condition requiring us to provide a biodiversity net gain. So we've assessed the current value of the site in terms of its field. We're providing a net gain in terms of we're providing a various range of different things like planting, swift bricks, hedgehog highways, various different things to boost the score, boost the value of the site to provide a net gain. So I think there is a condition requiring that. It doesn't necessarily put quantity to it, but it requires us to provide a net gain.
And if we wanted to tighten that condition up, we could potentially say something like ask the ecologist to come back with a quantity that you would have to work within, or a proportion or something like that. And
I don't know which, I mean, you'd have to ask the officer. I don't know which condition it is, but I think from memory, it's quite clear that we need to provide a net gain in provision. So it's for your officer to respond.
And in terms of heat pumps and solar panels and things like that, you know, is there a sort of proportion of the houses that you have to consider those with because of the new building regulations, or is there a proportion of the houses that you will be considering putting heat pumps in or something like that?
Yeah,
anyway?
so the building regs regime is different to the planning regime. The building regs regime is changes every 5 years. It gets stronger and stronger in terms of its ask, in terms of energy efficiency and carbon emission reduction, etc. We wouldn't be willing to sign up to say a 30% provision of solar panels at this stage, because we do, like I explained to your colleague, we just don't know what's the most feasible and viable option. But what I would say is the building regs regime is quite strict in terms of you've got to show a reduction in carbon emissions across the site of a certain percentage already. So so that is quantified in there already. Again, the relevant condition, I'm not sure which condition it is, but I can take you to it if you'd like. Is that clear or not?
I think what's probably worth members just holding in mind is that, you know, conditions are there to make an application acceptable, and a condition has to be reasonable and enforceable and such like. So in a sense, it's welcome that the applicant is indicating a willingness to look and take on board some of the points that are being made. If members feel that the conditions need to be tightened up to make the development acceptable, then we take advice from the officers about what is and isn't reasonable to do, and that's a decision for the committee to make rather than for the applicant.
Thank you. And I was planning on asking the officers that later, but I just thought,
sure,
while the applicant is here.
Are there any further? I've seen Councillor Widdowson. If anybody else could just indicate if there's any further questions. Otherwise, I think last question to Councillor Widdowson.
It's just two very simple questions. The biodiversity net gain, is it the 10% that you're being asked to deliver on?
It's not 10%, no, because that's not mandatory requirement yet. It's just a net gain. So we've assessed the current value and we're providing a gain. So
okay, so it's a question I'll need to ask officers, because I thought it was mandatory 10% from January. Is it not? Okay, so we'll get clarification on that. And then just a tiny question. How many of the homes will have EV chargers?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I
Couldn't
find that. I couldn't find it. But
again, to come back to the question, that's a building regs requirement. Actually, now it's pretty standard. It's in the national policy, but it's also building regs requirement. Just come back on with 10%. It's mandatory in January next year on applications submitted next year. This was submitted 2 years ago, so it's way in advance of that regime. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands, so thank you very much for your time, Mr. Tate. And I will now move us on to questions to officers. Just before I invite questions from the committee, I just would like Becky just to be clear with us around 106, because there's been quite a lot of conversation there around suggested changes to the 106 agreements that are in place. If you could just talk us through what is and isn't within the committee's gift to address.
Page 41, it talks about the requested 106 contributions. And we outline specifically what's required as part of that development. But to be clear, there are three tests that we need to make sure that this passes in terms of the request that we make. So we need to make sure that it's necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to this development, to only the 139 dwellings that you're considering, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So it's not for this development to start solving problems outside of this development as it is. So obviously we've spoke a lot about the NHS and the doctor's surgery. We have spoken with the healthcare services, and they have given us we've spoken to the Humber and North Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, and they have given us specific advice about what they need and require. They've given us evidence to that, and that's how we've ended up at that figure. And that is considered to be necessary, directly related, and fairly and reasonable. Anything over and above that, we don't consider would pass the test that it's got to. So that's how we've got to, and that's the same with every contribution that we've looked at in terms of a 106. It's got to be fair, it's got to be necessary, directly related, and fairly and reasonable. And that's how we've come to what we've got to in terms of the request that we've had and how we've decided whether or not it's reasonable. Does that help?
Thank you. So again, for members, when we get to the point of decision making, these are things that we need to consider within the material balance of the application, but hopefully that was clear in terms of what we can and can't do within this forum this evening. So questions to officers. Councillor Merritt, if you recall way back when you had a question, which I'll invite you to ask now to Emma as Public Protection Officer. And if I could just ask if members have any questions specifically related to the public protection questions, if they could be asked first, please, just because we're hoping to release Emma from the committee so that she can get home at a reasonable time.
I wanted to ask about the acoustic protection. When we went to the site, there was noise from couple of the industrial units, and they had things outside the main buildings. But at least with one of the buildings, the noise was coming from a ventilation outlet that was a first floor level. A 2.6 metre high acoustic fence might protect the downstairs of the houses facing it, but would not necessarily protect the upstairs. And of course, industrial premises sometimes may work sort of 8 to 4:30, but sometimes when they're busy, they work extended hours. Sometimes you have night shifts, you know, those sorts of things. So has the acoustic assessment considered not just daytime noise, but nighttime noise? And is a 2.6 metre high acoustic fence sufficient to deal with noise emanating from higher levels in the industrial buildings?
Okay, the acoustic surveys that were done, and there has been a couple of acoustic surveys that have been carried out by 2 different companies. The noise levels were taken during the day, predominantly because of the operating hours being generally kind of 7 till 11. So daytime in terms of noise, how we assess noise is from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. And all of the activities that were happening on site were between those hours. The vent that you obviously mentioned within on the site survey would have probably been the ventilation from the village green preserves, which has been assessed as part of the acoustic surveys that were done during the day. That overall assessment, when the kind of noise levels are looked at, it wasn't causing an issue at where the gardens would be for daytime noise. So ground level gardens, living areas for daytime, which would be living rooms and also bedrooms. So the noise levels within the gardens with the acoustic barrier and with the glazing and ventilation that's been provided were suitable for the kind of daytime noise levels.
Yeah. What about the potential of night working, presumably, yeah, unless there's existing hours conditions on those premises?
There is
that could work at night,
yeah,
when different background noise levels are normally taken.
Yeah, there is existing conditions. I'm sure Neil will talk about them for some of the industrial units. There is one unit which I believe there isn't specifically hours of operation conditions, so they could potentially work, you know, and they have actually made representation that they could work as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. So that has been looked at as well in terms of the calculations, and with the aspect of the ventilation and glazing that would be put in place in a bedroom, then the noise levels were still acceptable within the bedrooms.
Okay. I've got a few people who I've got indicated, but can I just double check who's got questions that are related to anything public protection? Nobody got anything further that they wanted to ask on that? In which case, Thank you very much for attending, Emma.
Thank you.
And I will move on to Councillor Stewart. I think you had a question that you proposed originally to one of the speakers that was actually dropped.
Thanks, Chair. I got too excited. So it's just on the point about the sports facilities that the first speaker mentioned, the top of page 12, and I'm very sympathetic to the idea that, you know, Wheldrake sports facilities should be within Wheldrake. It talks in the report about or another sports project within a 15 to 20-minute walking distance, which I can understand, or within 30 minutes on public transport. And my question really is, what does that mean, or within 30 minutes on public transport? Because if you were, for example, to say, how far can you get from Wheldrake at a time of your choosing using public transport? You could say, well, I will make sure it is, I leave at 6:30 and the bus is at 6:31 and I can therefore get to Thorganby or something like that, which would be one thing. Or it could equally mean, I want to meet you somewhere for a drink, join me there in 30 minutes, and that will be at any time of your choosing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if it's on 5 point. Yeah, in terms of what the comments in the report are, they're from Lifelong Learning and Leisure, and that's probably a catch-all comment to a degree, so that if there wasn't the ability to provide anything in Wheldrake, then there would be an option to provide something in Alvington and so forth and so forth. But actually in the report at 5.75, it has different wording, or sorry, 5.74. If you look at that paragraph, it has different wording where it talks about contribution will be intended to be used for a sports project within a 20-minute walking distance. So that's the consultative comments, but the planning office or local planning authorities comments would be that yes, we'd look to spend it in Wheldrake.
That's fine. I'm fine with that. And yeah, as you're right, that's much clearer and better in my view. It says 20-minute walks. Everyone knows what that is. Whereas, you know, the 30-minute public transport, you could theoretically get something a significant long way away. There'll be no relevance to Wheldrake at all.
I think it's probably they don't want to lose it. If, for example, there was no at that time they had to spend, there's nowhere in Wheldrake to spend it.
Can I just add to that? We did when this came through for check-in, I specifically looked at that, and our job as planners is to look at the requests and whether or not they're reasonable, and that was why it was taken out. I took it out at that point because everybody knows what a 20-minute walk is. 30-minute on a bus could be anywhere or anything. That is specific and relatable. That's how we got to where we got to on that one.
Okay, next I had Councillor Wardby.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to talk to Highways really about the road going in and out of the area, the new development proposed. Is the road going to be like improved? Is it going to be widened? And then further afield, I have to ask, is they're saying that there's too much traffic as there is. So is it infrastructure strong enough to like cope? And then for cycling, it's all right saying you've got safe cycling routes on the site, but then are people going to be safe further afield? I know we're supposed to look at just this site, but if there's money that was supposed to be spent somewhere else on improving cycling, then why hasn't it been done, and why are we looking at further afield as well? Thank you.
Taking it in the order presented, there was a transport assessment prepared, and also we asked the transport consultant to provide an assessment of the road safety information and the accident information in the area. And there was nothing from the information provided to suggest that the roads in themselves wouldn't be able to take the initial demand from the development. There were no implicit safety implications from the development. In terms of safe cycle provision, it comes back again to the tests for meeting planning obligation and requests. It was considered unreasonable to ask the applicant and the developer to contribute to the Sustrans cycle route between Wheldrake and into York. And also, if you are asking for a contribution, it has to go to identified projects or support services. So in terms of the cycling from the site to the wider area, I've cycled to the site and it's not the distance of cycling from Wheldrake to York isn't conducive for commuting because it takes probably 45 minutes to an hour to commute by bike, but there's nothing to say that you wouldn't cycle for leisure purposes. And when for other connections other than travelling by car, we've sought to improve the public transport service to the site, which we've sought the contributions for.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. It's just one other question I've got, and it's not about highways. It's about the electric charge points. I just wanted to be clear, how many are there? Because I couldn't find it on my thing. So, because I thought they mentioned
It's
one.
under building reg, so it doesn't need, so we don't double up in terms of if it's covered under building regulations, we don't put it in the planning.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's required through that, so we don't need to secure it twice. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
fine. Brilliant.
Okay, next on my list is councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I had some questions about travel planning because some of it seems to be left open to be determined later. Like there's a condition about having to have a travel plan agreed by officers head of development, and then some of it seems to have already been kind of considered and determined. So like having one space for a car club and the provision towards peak time buses and that sort of thing. So I was just wondering what is already, if we approve this, you know, as written in the report, how much of that is then you know, not possible to change, and how much of it is actually open to be covered in the travel plan? So for example, will it make it difficult in the future if when doing the travel planning, it looks like more than one space is needed for a car club? Is it going to be impossible to kind of impose that because there's a condition saying that only one is required and that sort of thing?
Yeah, when it came to the car club space, we asked the applicant to provide at least one with a view to expanding that and providing more spaces should the need arise in future. So the travel plan would allow some flexibility, and there is space within the development itself probably to put more car club spaces in should the demand prove that it's needed. The travel plan sets out a range of measures, and we have to be satisfied that the range of measures put out in that travel plan would achieve the targets for sustainable transport. And we've also got separate commitment from the applicant to fund improvements to public transport services. That is a separate contribution in addition to what's already set out in the travel plan and the initial sustainable transport measures proposed by the applicant.
Two supplementaries. Yeah, so the condition doesn't say at least one car club parking space or anything like that. It just says a designated car club parking space. That's condition 18 on page 60 of the report. And my other question was about the buses and how, what the evidence basis was for requesting financial contribution towards peak time bus services rather than other bus services, because it sounds like there already are peak bus services which are commercially viable, and also they're likely to become more commercially viable by then being more residents added to the village, whereas it's the other times that public transport is needed and doesn't currently exist.
Okay, I can look at the car club provision. I suspect that could be if members wished for that condition to be amended to say a minimum of one car club space with a view to future provision to make it more explicit. In terms of the public transport, we normally plan for peak time travel. So the transport impacts of a development are usually assessed at peak time travel. So we are seeking to put public transport improvements in to reduce peak car period travel. We have secured more than double the initial funding contribution from the applicant to put towards public transport improvements. And we as a local authority, when we receive that money, we can determine how that money is best spent, whether that's primarily focusing on improving peak time travel to half hourly services, or if we wish to use that to make travel more dispersed throughout the day. But our public transport team have said that they are satisfied with that level of contribution that's been provided. When we're looking at bus services in Wheldrake as existing, there are two services that run in Wheldrake. They are primarily peak hour services, but they also run at other times during the day. They run at 10:36, 11:49, 12:40, 13:59, 14:40 and 17:34 from Wheldrake to York. Going in the opposite direction, they run at 12:20, 13:23, 15:50 and 16:15. So the bus services Monday to Friday are already reasonably dispersed throughout the day, except that they don't run half hourly. They run at longer periods in between. So they run hourly in some cases, or in other times, a couple of hours. But we could use the funding to see where those longer periods in between bus services running could be changed to optimise services. The condition says we will use it to optimise bus services to Wheldrake, not tie ourselves necessarily to peak hours.
Okay, Councillor Merritt, I had you down next.
I was going to ask similar questions on the bus. I thought it did refer to peak time bus in the report. So I'm concerned about the wording. Does leave you the flexibility to say what's you said there.
I think the key thing will be what the condition says rather than what the report says. So if we can just confirm that the wording is.
The section 106.
Yeah, 7.2 in the proposed 106, it talks about 70,000 to support peak time bus services.
Yeah, so perhaps that needs adjusting in the circumstances.
Yeah, I think there may be another paragraph in the report that says to optimise services as well. So I'll need to double check if there's a conflict in the report.
If I just change it to support bus services, that's sufficient.
Yeah. Okay. The second.
Oh, sorry.
The second point is you referred to basically the basis on which you look in the first instance to address bus service issues is for peak times, because that will offset car journeys, and that's obviously one laudable aim. But bus services are there, people don't just travel to and from conventional daytime office jobs. People, and particularly as there are going to be a number of affordable housing properties, there will be people who potentially have shift work type jobs, and so on. There may well be people who have religious convictions who'd like to go to church on a Sunday. So providing bus services is not simply about addressing peak time travel issues and congestion in the city. So I was quite disturbed at that statement.
Yeah, I think that's obviously an omission on our part, and we just I will ask that you, as part of when you debate, if you decide that I've obviously written down about condition 18, that you amend it to a minimum, but also that you change that you remove the peak because it's reasonable to do it. Sorry.
Yeah, but that then raises the question, if the discussions and negotiation have really been based on only trying to address peak time hours, is 70,000 the right number to deal with the issues?
It hasn't, it's an omission that we've put in the report there. Ian has very clearly explained to you how he's got to where he's got to, it's just that we've.
It comes again under what is meets the MPPF tests, and maybe what members consider what meets those tests. We have negotiated and discussed public transport provision and the contributions that's required for public transport provisions with the applicant, to the point where we consider it to be reasonable, fair and directly related. If you want to extend bus services further, you will need more funding towards that. Now, it's then, does that additional funding still classed as fair, reasonable and directly related?
Yeah, and what Ian is saying is right. I think to ask for any more than what we've asked for wouldn't be reasonable and directly relatable. And in terms of how we work.
Sorry, Councillor Merrick, just allow Becky to, and then I'll allow you to come back.
And that's how we've got there, and we've worked out this in terms of it, and then Ian has been through it, and we've worked out that it's reasonable. But if you remove the peak, it allows the flexibility there. I can't sit here and promise you that it will be used for Sunday service, because I don't know that we don't necessarily think that that's possible, but it will give a amount of flexibility there. It isn't, in the officer's opinion, reasonable to ask for any more than the contribution that we've already secured. And we've worked it, and we've been through the process and we've worked it out. It isn't unreasonable to take away the peak, but I can't sit here and tell you that it would go to a Sunday service. It would be remiss of us to say that to you. But again, I'll draw you back to directly relatable for the 139 dwellings that you're considering in front of them. This isn't to provide a bus service for the whole of Wheldrake. That's not what this development is here for. It's for the 139.
So, Councillor Merritt, very welcome to respond with a question. There may be elements that the committee wants to debate and consider whether or not we think that there's sufficient mitigation on the whole application. But
I'd just like to ask one supplementary. You know, as I say, we were with affordable housing, you are likely to be dealing with low income occupants who may not be able to afford a car, who will be highly dependent on public transport services. How can we say it's not directly relatable and reasonable to ensure that there are sufficient bus services, not just for a conventional 9-to-5 job, but to live the other aspects of people's lives, which includes travelling in the evenings and travelling on Sundays and travelling early mornings.
So I think what we probably have to do as a committee is consider the officers' responses and advice. We then have to think whether we think that the various mitigations that are set out in the report, whether they make the development acceptable, and that's how we then reach our conclusion. But I think the officers can go so far in terms of the advice that they're giving, and then it's up to us as committee members to decide beyond that.
Okay. Can I ask a further question about the cycling?
You may. I saw a couple of hands come up, which I wasn't sure whether they were supplementary. Neither is supplementary, in which case I will just note you down. But yes, Councillor Merritt, on you.
Okay. In terms of the list of the policies that were referred to, there's no reference to policy T5, which is strategic cycling provision. And I'd like to come back to first of all ask whether the draft LC whip, as I understood it, I haven't seen the actual document, does not refer to strategic cycling routes to all the main villages around the city, and therefore it should have been considered. And secondly, even if it is not regarded as a strategic cycling route, the draft local plan policy does refer to the policy also applying to non-strategic cycling routes. In which case I would have thought the Sustrans proposal would have been something that we ought to have been considering.
Just bear me, I'm looking up policy T5 now, so.
Just while you're looking that up, I'm just going to refresh my list of people. So I've got a few names on my list. So I've got Councillor Nelson, followed by Councillor Melly, followed by Councillor Widdowson, followed by Councillor Hollier, followed by Councillor Stewart. Have I got anybody else who's, I'm not saying that's a closed list, but I'm just making sure that you all know I've got your names. Do you want me to come back to you on that if we?
2 seconds. I mean, I'm referring to the initial publication draft local plan policy T5 because unfortunately I don't have access to the latest track changes version readily. But these schemes that are identified in the initial version of the local plan publication draft, these were strategic routes that were to support the delivery of the local transport plan. So my view on that would be that they would be council schemes largely funded by the council or funded through external agency funding, where we could obtain development contributions towards those. That would be very useful. But again, it comes back to whether they're directly related, whether they're fair and reasonable, and whether they are necessary for planning terms. The scheme from Wheldrake into York would benefit from a developer contribution, but I believe it doesn't meet those tests.
Okay, a final comment on that? Yeah.
Just to note, it is a part, I was referring to a part of the policy T5 that was not amended, other than changing the word proposals to policies map. It was in the previous version as well. It reads, this plan will also support proposals that improve access to and around new developments, particularly strategic sites, and proposals that improve other cycle and pedestrian routes that are neither strategic network links nor routes included in the policies map.
Agreed. But again, I reiterate my previous point.
And I will just reiterate that committee, ultimately, we will have to take that into consideration in our deliberations. Councillor Nelson, I had you next.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One of the things when you're talking about proportional to these 139 houses, which I completely understand, there is a little alarm bell in the back of my head going, this is it 83% of the site that was highlighted on the local plan? And I'm just wondering whether in a proportionate way we can still be or we can or should be still perhaps looking at the bigger pictures, or whether any conversations have happened. For example, with the NHS, we might have talked about 139 houses. And then does that mean we'll be having another set of conversations with Elvington Medical Practice if in the future the other bit of this site that is allocated for the local plan then comes to committee? And actually that doesn't seem to me to be working very sensibly. And is this the only site in Wheldrake on the local plan? That's the whole one. Okay, excellent. So I'm just wondering whether there is, I think it would be useful to have a kind of discussion on your thoughts of how we would approach that, because it seems like we should absolutely be asking for 83% of what we would be needing, but we as the local authority need to be looking at the 100% possibility probably now in terms of our planning, rather than chipping back into it later.
Now, in terms of the site, it was, the rough allocation was 147 to 150 units for the whole ST33. Obviously, this is 139 units, which isn't far off. And in terms of contributions for education, health, that's done by a size of the property, the amount of people it will generate aspects. So obviously, we don't know if the rest of the site will come forward. That's in different ownership. They might try and develop it, they might not. But if they do at that stage, we'd look at whether there was capacity at schools and so forth, capacity in the GP surgery, and then look at if it justifies a contribution at that stage. But I don't think we can ask the developer to pay contributions from a, that's not their
That's not what I was asking. I was more wondering about kind of whether, I don't know, money can be held for a certain amount of time, or whether there can be kind of some sort of mitigations in what we then do with that section at 106.
I get what you're saying. In an ideal world, you'd have had the site as a whole, as the whole allocation. It hasn't come to us like that. And then we have to consider it as it is now. We can't reasonably hold back funding, because as part of a 106, there'll be triggers to when the contributions are paid. So there'll be triggers when you meet a certain amount of hours. Oh, say for education, there'll be triggers throughout the development of when the contributions are paid, because obviously that's when the children start arriving, and once that's why we ask for a monitoring fee, because we will monitor when these houses come forward to then see when those contributions should be paid. And we can't reasonably hold that back, because when that trigger's met, there will be some form of mitigation needed. So yeah, in an ideal world, you'd have it as a whole. We haven't, but we can't reasonably hold it back for that reason.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check that. Can I ask one other thing as well?
You can. I've just seen a couple of other hands, and I wasn't sure if they're supplementary to this point. Councillor Fisher is yours. Councillor Stewart is yours supplementary to this as well. In which case, I'll come to the both of you first, and then I'll come back to you. So I did see Councillor Stewart first, and then Councillor Fisher, if you're okay.
So I'm guessing Councillor Nelson's will probably be more relevant to her own. Is it okay? Okay. So basically, it's just about the point of the local plan, and for me, obviously, it's a bit unusual for me that the plan hasn't yet formally been approved, and yet we've already got quite a notable variation to a site, which flags some interesting issues about deliverability. So given that the site is different from what's been approved in the local plan, I was wondering how significant that was, because my sort of view on it is it's greenbelt, so it should be kicked out. However, obviously, as we're told in the report, York doesn't say it's got a 5-year land supply, and so that's very material. But then it's the point about, because it's a change to the site, and so I'd be grateful just from guidance on that from officers of how much can we change a site before it doesn't become before all the stuff about it being in the local plan ceases to be relevant.
Neil said this earlier on. If you can see here where my red line is, you have got that road there that comes all the way up to the boundary that will allow the rest of the site to come forward. So that allows that to happen in the future. If for example, this is a bad example, but it makes my point. If there was housing all along that boundary there and no way of accessing the second part of the allocation, that would be a reason where we would say that's not acceptable, because you then can't bring the next part of the site forward. There's no way in there. But there very clearly is, and that's secured as part of the full planning permission, that there is an access through to the next part of the site as if when it comes forward.
Councillor Stewart, I'll bring you, and then I will come to you, Councillor Fisher, but Councillor well, he's got the floor. Yeah,
I don't understand. I appreciate that. However, it's not being sort of totally flippant. By logic, if somebody put a planning application just the very first house, top left, just for one house, and obviously there'd be a road past it, so we could build the other 138, and then the ones the sort of bottom left, we wouldn't be considering that as a valid. It's because it's this site. So it's at what point does this site cease to be inevitable and everything like that because it's in the draft local plan? My sort of thought is, how much variation can we tolerate? I'm not saying this is too much variation. I'm just asking.
I can't answer that. I can only ask you to consider what's in front of you, and that's what we've done. We've considered what's in front of us, and we've made a judgment based on that.
I think, and I will bring you in this in 1 second, Councillor Fisher. I think in the report it does make reference to how much weight the fact that the site is allocated within the local plan can be given within the planning balance, and then there are other considerations around Greenbelt and the merits of this application site in and of itself, which we as a committee will want to weigh up. So your point about, you know, one house or two houses versus 139 houses, in a sense, you're looking at a site which has been allocated, part of which is being developed before the actual planners, local planners adopted. It doesn't prevent the rest of that site being developed, and therefore doesn't fail the test of what do you call it? Bringing it forward too soon. Prematurity. Thank you very much. It doesn't fail that test because it doesn't mean that you can't develop that site. Therefore, but we aren't considering it as a local plan site because we don't have a local plan. We're considering it as a site within the green belt that may or may not meet the test of special circumstances. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I was just going to bring up the fact that if the other part of the site was developed at a standard density of 35 a hectare, it's about a hectare in area, it would produce 174 houses in contrast to the 147, which is a 19% increase. I just want to be clear that does not cause problems with the local plan, because the local plan said 147, presumably that was assessing what Wheldrake could cope with on this site. Moving it up to a potential total of 174 when the other part is developed doesn't cause conflict with the local plan.
No, the figures in the local plan where they talk about the numbers on each side, that's the general figure and it's always site specific.
Okay, right. Next on my quite long list.
Another one.
Sorry, apologies. I'll
It's all
come
right.
back to you for your second question.
Thank you. Sorry, the other thing I wanted to ask about was it was mentioned that there's a lack of provision of cycle racks in the village in front of the shops and cafe and things. When we're looking at the section 106 for cycling infrastructure, you know, I know that all the houses have cycle parking and things like that, and part of the way the site is being built, rightly so, is encouraging cycling. Is that not right? I was just reading. Oh, I am right. Okay. But anyway, cycling, parking and spaces and things like that are being considered for all these houses as part of the development of it. But if there isn't infrastructure in the village for them to cycle to, separate to this big Sustrans thing, would that be something that we could and should be looking at within this?
The normal thing that we look at would be cycling provision within the development itself, either as a generator, as in where people live and then it journeys out from there, or as an attractor where people are going to. The shops in the village are not part of this planning application and they're not applying to have development at the shops. Therefore, it is not directly related to this development.
It does seem to me that 139 households worth of people cycling in and around the village has a material impact on the village and its
I get what you're
communities.
saying, but we don't know if it was reasonable, and I get where Ian's gone, but we don't even know. We can't ask for a contribution if we don't know that it's going to be deliverable. We don't know who owns it. We don't know if it can be brought forward. It all becomes to what if, and we can't ask for something reasonably.
But we can ask for something that is an ongoing project, is that right? Or like something that has already been highlighted as a
Potentially,
project
but
of need.
I've taken you completely off subject, sorry, but what we need to look at is the development and exactly what Ian has said in terms of the impact of that, and we can't reasonably then ask for the extra provision when we don't know that we could provide it. We don't know how much it cost. We don't have that. We can't reasonably ask for it, I think, is where we've got to.
I understand that. Perhaps that's where we are now.
Yeah.
Is that, would it be remiss of me to, is that possibly something that has been missed in the conversations around this, in terms of, I'm only going off Councillor Vassey's comments that suggest that the village have been looking at this and probably do know how much it would cost and what the need is. Does that mean that those conversations should have happened and haven't?
The difficulty with asking for cycle parking to be provided in various areas of the village is if it's on private land, we can't reasonably ask for it to be done. The only way we can ask for it to be reasonably done if we're looking at, and it is a question again, if it could be done reasonably as a part of this development. I think that if we were looking to improve cycle parking in the village and it was on land in the highway and it didn't cause an obstruction or anything else for people walking in the village, it would be a scheme funded by somebody other than the developer. For this development, it would be a ward funded scheme or a council funded scheme if it was deemed appropriate and necessary to fund it. It's out with this application.
I think one of the key tests from my job as a planner is always, if they didn't provide it, could you refuse the application? And if you said to them, we want you to provide 3 cycle stands outside Coscutter, they said, no, we're not doing it. You couldn't refuse it. I don't, you know, it's not so related to the scheme. It's probably for Coscutter to provide that rather than the applicant to you. And I can understand why people would want it and push for it, but I don't think we could refuse an application on that basis.
Could it be potentially something that would be looked at within the sport and leisure section 106 money? Because no, okay, fine. Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to explore that. I think it seems a bit, I understand that you work within the remits that you work with, but it seems a bit mad that we're talking about hundreds more bikes in the village, but we can't put a few bike stands in the village. Anyway, thank you very much for your help.
Welcome to the joys of planning. Councillor Melly, I've got you next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about traveller pitches and why they're not being provided on site. Because I think usually with those sorts of developer contributions like affordable housing and green space, they're supposed to be on site preferably. And if that's not possible, then a commuted sum. I was just wondering why it wasn't possible in this case. And not only that, just as a, just as a general thing, on site is preferred to commuted. But I think in the local plan hearings, there was a commitment that sites over a certain size, it's about 100 houses, 100 dwellings, the traveller pitches would be provided on site. Just wondering why that commitment isn't proposed to be met here.
Yeah, it's a timing issue in terms of when this application was submitted, and when the hearings took place, and the weight that we could give it at the point when we were negotiating the ask. I would absolutely, there is a clear expectation from now on that they will be provided on site. That is absolutely where we're going. And that's what we want to see. It is purely due to a timing issue of when this was submitted. And I know that doesn't quite in terms of the timings, but it was the weight that we could give when we were asked and the reasonableness as part of the process of how they then developed this site. We negotiated, and yet it isn't a place where we would ultimately want to be, and we won't in the future. The strategic sites, the clear ask is it will be on site. The ones that we've got in now, for example, we are negotiating, I use the Haxby as an example, we're negotiating on-site provision as part of that one, because that is a strategic site that is in. The expectation is it will be on site. It is a timing issue with this one.
Even prior to that commitment being made though, and that timing issue, I thought that the preferred option was always for it, all of it, not just traveller accommodation, but yeah, other things like green space, affordable housing, it still should be on site where possible. So I'm just wondering what justification has been provided for why it's not possible and why a commuted sum has been provided instead.
It was through a negotiation in terms of the size of the site, where we were with the local plan. We didn't at that point in time feel that we had enough weight behind the policy and where it was that we could start and we weren't in a strong enough position to negotiate that. We are now, but when this application came in and through the asks that we've made, we weren't at that point. We are now, absolutely we are now, but we have tried, but it's just timing with this one.
So you're not able to provide us what the reasons were?
It was when it came in, I think it was about October, November 2021. At that stage, we would accept off-site contributions. And obviously the situation changed over the past 2 years, but with a scheme drawn up to a level of detail it's been drawn up to for a year or so, to then go back and say, no, you've got to redesign it and accommodate this, it was considered to be unreasonable in this context.
It's not just a matter of, so some of these houses will be affordable housing.
There is affordable housing on site.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
there's affordable housing on site. Is there 5% self-build?
There is, yeah.
So it's possible, once it's been pre-designed, to go, okay, these ones are going to be affordable, but it's not possible to go, okay, and that one is going to be allocated to someone from the traveller community.
I don't think, I think the travellers pitch is actually an area of land and then the different facilities and so forth. It's not just the case of, instead of having a house, we'll have a travellers pitch. It's a bit more complicated in terms of the requirements.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I think just as a point for us to think, I think it's very welcome that there's a very clear expectation going forward that there will be on-site provision on future applications, and I think it's really important that we make that point very, very clearly. But I share some of the concerns that have been raised in terms of how this has come forward, but this has come forward as it is, and again it all comes down to planning balance and I'm going to keep saying it, but we have to consider all of these different mitigations and whether or not the overall balance is acceptable. Councillor Widdowson was next.
Got a series of questions, so apologies now, okay, because I'm conscious of time. When you're looking at the map, am I correct in thinking that the bottom right-hand side, there's something to Back Lane South? Is there a connection to Back Lane South? Yeah. Now, am I correct? I could be completely wrong because I literally only went and had a look yesterday on my own. Is that an unmetalled road? It's not got tarmac and things on it. My understanding is you call it, my husband told me it was unmetalled was the phrase I was supposed to use.
Back Lane South,
It's
where
more a
that
track than anything else.
it is actually adopted highway.
Yeah, but it's still a track when you go down it. It's not actually.
Yes, but as we've got improvements to the north end of Back Lane South down to where the proposed emergency access and cycle access is at the north east corner of the site. The rest of Back Lane South is to remain as it is.
Okay, because I would think as a council, I know it's not to do with the development, right, but I would think as a council, we really need to look at that road because given that you've got you're going to have what 139 cars minimum, some of which are going to be using that entrance and exit to go in and out.
No,
You're not getting it.
No.
Right. Okay. I just think that will be used quite a lot, and maybe you need to have a view on that.
Yes, the southeast corner of the site is only cycle and pedestrian access only.
Right.
So
okay.
there will be no.
And it's
The only
cycles then.
The only people driving down Back Lane South will be the residents on Back Lane South who already have the road in the condition that they have.
Okay, and you think that's okay for cycles to go up and down at the moment?
The northern part of the site will be improved for cyclists to come out of the northeast corner of the site. The southeast corner of the site is more for leisure cycling along public rights of way and small lanes. So yes.
Okay, all right then, that's fine.
Just for the benefit of the committee, when I was on the site visit and I was in my car and I had to give way to a supermarket vehicle coming down that back lane, so I don't think it's an entirely rough track. It's definitely a narrow carriageway, and I didn't go along the length of it, but it was suitable for a supermarket vehicle to get along.
I would genuinely suggest it gets a look at, certainly from our point. And then going back to the different comments that Councillor Nelson has said, is there a way, and I don't know if there is, Becky, is there a way of putting the monies as and when they're released or beforehand, given that there seems to be hundreds of thousands of pounds at stake here for a whole variety of different things? Is there a way of putting it into something like an escrow account so that actually you can spend it as and when to where it is required? You know, is there a way of doing that? And the final point I'd make on looking at the various different bits and pieces is if all the money for the GP or for the health goes to Elvington, I would imagine Wheldrake would be a bit cross because it was between Elvington and, wasn't it Elvington was, if I heard earlier, I think it was one of the public speakers said it, was one of the reasons that the Wheldrake one closed so that everything could be consolidated in Elvington. So is there a way of doing something with the money? And is there a way of thinking, as, you know, building on what Councillor Nelson said, as more houses are built in this area and the needs are going to be fairly obvious and we can already start seeing them, that we are aware of that and put something in place?
Unfortunately, that's not how section 106s work. So today you're agreeing under section 7, page 53, the contributions that will be secured as part of this development there. They come in when they hit the trigger, as I explained before. And then once they come in, they're released to the relevant department or the relevant. So for example, it will go to education and they will then spend that money as and where needed. There's no escrow account. We try not to hold money in terms of when it comes in and when it's spent, but we can't, the 106 ties down specifically where that money's spent, and we can't change it. That's what you're agreeing today. Everything on page 53 is what you're agreeing today in terms of the contributions for this development that have been worked out on an evidence basis that officers have made a judgment and considered reasonable based on the asks. Does that help?
It helps. I just think it's a bit daft considering that we know that there's going to be more development and then therefore there's going to be more need. But by the time that the second set of need arrives, you've spent the first set of money in an area where it could have been better directed if it had been kept. So I just think it's daft.
Yeah, that's how 106s work. Eventually, when we move to SIL, hopefully, it will change how we look at things such as this.
Okay, and Councillor Hollier, I had you next.
Thanks, Chair. Would it be possible to say a bit more about why the sort of healthcare money is going to Elvington, and whether or not it was looked into the possibility of refurbishing Wheldrake? Because when I look at the reports, the care partnership, so they say, oh, it'll cost £350,000 plus VAT plus inflation to refurbish it. The GP practice is interested, but the health service has no money, so it probably wouldn't happen. But obviously, Section 106 gives you an opportunity to find some money, and the Integrated Care Board just sort of says, oh well, Wheldrake's closed. The nearest one's Elvington. There's 30 square meters of deficit space, so you need £133,000 or whatever. But it seems like there's just a kind of assumption that you couldn't refurbish Wheldrake, whereas actually, is that possible?
We've had meetings with the clinical trust, and also at one meeting, Elvington Medical Practice was there, and I understand that their view that the most efficient way of providing the services is to expand at Elvington Medical Practice. It's not the intention to reopen Wheldrake surgery. In the surgery shut a couple of years ago. I'm not sure whether it's just a condition. I don't know if they're operational issues, but there were meetings in terms of the actual NHS, how they felt it'd be best spent, as well as Elvington Medical Practice. And they felt the best option was to expand the medical practice in Elvington. We wouldn't necessarily say, we can't give you that money, you've got to spend it in Wheldrake and do your best to try and open that surgery. I think it's a matter for them and the NHS as well. I think the NHS will look to seek additional funding on top of the funding that comes in from the Section 106. So it'll create more space than just what's provided in terms of contribution alone.
Okay. Councillor Stewart was next.
Thank you. It's just on the sort of bottom right of the map related to Councillor Willison's question. Was thought given to that being a road access as well? I mean, obviously, I appreciate the downside would be people on Back Lane South, maybe wouldn't like that, or was that looked at and were there options?
No, I think it's probably prioritising pedestrian cycle routes in the area. It's a nice route in the sense that pedestrians and cyclists can go along the rest of back lane south at the south. And there's also a public right of way through to the fields just immediately to the south. So I think it wouldn't probably be beneficial bringing cars through there, I don't think.
And just a second question on if you're on back lane south, you're obviously looking out at the hedge. Is that hedge all the way along? Can you go back to the map, please? Just sorry, the first one that it was on. No, the first. Yeah. So for example, if you're in a house in back lane south and you want to meet, I'm just thinking about how it sits as within the village rather than a separate site to the village. And obviously, for me, it makes it a bit more of a separate site to the village. That you've got one vehicle way in and one vehicle way out. So if you lived at a house in back lane south and you wanted to meet somebody in that green area for a picnic, is there any way through the sort of hedge? So, for example, at the top of the green area, can you cut through, or do you have to walk, all the way down and then all the way back up?
It would just be walking and cycling from that direction, and the only vehicle entrance is up from the top on Main Street.
No, that's fine. But if you live in a house on back lane south, so for example, if you live in the third house down and you want to meet someone on the grassed area, can you cut through exactly where that red dot's just gone? So where Becky, was it? So you can cut through there, yeah. So okay, fine, yep. That is fine. Yeah.
I think for clarity, we've got a pedestrian and emergency vehicle access at the top of back lane south and at the bottom of back lane south. And then there's a kind of a little stream that runs along. So there are your 2 points that you'll be able to get across. Okay, I had Councillor Fisher is the last person who I've got on my list.
Thank you. Conditions 30 and 31 relate to the replacement of equipment at village green preserves. I'm just looking to the solicitor for guidance on this. It seems to put an obligation on village green preserves or the subsequent occupiers. Now, they're not party to this application, they're third parties. Is it actually legal to put an obligation on a third party on a site, on a property that is outside the red line of the application?
Okay.
Page 64, condition 30 and 31. It is about replacement of a chiller and a ventilation system, filtration system to remove noise and odour. But it then puts obligations on the potential replacement of that. I can understand you want to condition the applicant to pay for this because it removes and mitigates against a nuisance. But is it legal to put a subsequent obligation on the occupiers of that site? Because I wouldn't see how that could be legal.
Yes, Chair, this condition would not be enforceable against the occupier of village green preserves. I think the purpose of this condition is it is what is known legally as a Grampian condition, which is a negatively worded condition, i.e. something must be done prior to occupation in this case. And the legal position is that conditions are possible which relate to activities which are outside the control of the applicant, provided that there is a prospect, a reasonable prospect, I can't remember the exact words, that the condition can be complied with. Now, I've discussed this condition with the planning officer, and he tells me that the applicants are confident that they have, Neil will correct me if I'm wrong, that the applicants are content with this condition because they have confidence, presumably having had discussions with Village Green Preserves, that Village Green Preserves are going to cooperate with this equipment being installed. And obviously, I would say that the applicant must have that confidence because this site cannot be occupied until that has been done.
Thank you for clarifying that. And just a supplementary, could you take a comfort break as soon as possible, please?
I'm moving towards that point. I'm just trying to get to the end of this section. So I've just got Councillor Widdowson indicated. I don't think there were any other questions.
It's really minor. I'm intrigued. Why are we've been discussing it. Why are some of the roofs grey and some of the roofs red?
Just to reflect the character of the village, that's the nature of the village, they're mostly clay tiled and then some slate, so it just reflects that, yeah.
Oh, we thought they might mean something.
It's not spelling anything out to play.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands for questions. So I'm going to propose that we take a short break. It's 6:30 now, so if we could just come back in 5 minutes' time at 7:25. Oh, and can I just be very clear, members mustn't just Okay, welcome back everybody to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee A. And we will now move into the debate section of the meeting. So just to remind everybody, this is not where we're looking for proposals on the actual recommendation, but just where people's heads are at in terms of their thoughts about the application and anything that they want people to take into consideration. And if I could just remind everybody in the nicest possible terms, if the person who just spoke before you made all the points you want to make, feel free just to say, I agree with that person. You don't need to repeat everything that was said. And with that in mind, if I could invite anybody who wishes to kick off any points that they want to discuss. Blimey. Are we all sufficiently content? Councillor Nelson.
This is probably actually a question still. But also, just thinking about conditions and the question I asked a while ago, I wasn't sure where to raise this. The question I asked the speaker about Swift bricks, since there are Swifts, and hedgehog highways, since there are hedgehogs, are they something that, is there some sort of room to tighten the existing condition to just kind of make sure that some of those things happen, or that the ecologist has a certain amount of sway to ask for specifics for those things? I've not got the condition open. It's within, is it condition 9, the landscape and ecological?
Now, I can make the suggestion possibly as an informative rather than a condition, and then I guess ecologists should work together and look if that's an effective use of the actual resources on that site. So yeah, I can put an informative which flags it up, and they'll consider it if that's okay.
I think that would be great. I think that's something we should be looking at, since it's obviously been highlighted that they are actual wildlife in the area, and there's obviously an openness to doing it. I just want to make sure that we're doing what we can to kind of put that in writing, that we want those things. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Widdowson.
Just a brief point building on the biodiversity net gain. So I know it doesn't come into legal until January, but I'm also aware of a number of developers across York that are already achieving that. So is there a way that we can condition that? It's not difficult. It's not problematic. It should be on what everybody's doing anyway. It has been in train for over two years.
They are doing that. I think it's committed that.
No, we didn't.
Not reasonably, no. Hence why we haven't put it on, because it doesn't come in until January, and that's for applications submitted from January. We can't reasonably ask for it. And if challenged, potentially, if the applicant was to take us to appeal about a condition, I don't think we'd be in a position to defend it, hence why we haven't put it on.
Okay, can we ask informally that the
Yeah,
applicant goes towards,
absolutely. We can
tries to meet, which is the new legislation, which, as I've said, has been in train for several years.
We can
And
have
we know
those.
developers are doing it.
Yes, we can have those discussions.
Okay.
Becky, I'd actually go further and say that the legislation that's due to come in January, it's not currently even a material consideration.
But we will have those conversations.
Okay, I'm inviting further thoughts on the application in its general terms at the moment. Obviously raised lots of specifics. Councillor Hollier.
So notwithstanding the specifics of the application, I struggle a bit with this, because it is clearly in the green belt at the moment. The policy in terms of the site selection, the housing policies, the council admits are all not really to be afforded much weight because of the outstanding objections to the allocation of the sites, which are still going through the system. So it needs very special circumstances, and the very special circumstances advanced in terms of the need for housing would be true of any greenbelt site in the city. So I really do struggle a bit when there's still outstanding objections and the planning answer, the plan isn't actually, yet to remove the site from the green belt to grant permission whilst there's still outstanding objections to the allocation.
Hey, Councillor Nelson.
I think we obviously need to discuss the greenbelt aspect of it. It's obviously something that hasn't really come up yet. I would absolutely push back though that it's not the same as any other site in the greenbelt, because not every other site in the greenbelt is identified in the local plan that is so close to being adopted, and that changes the nature of it. Because any other site in the greenbelt that isn't in the local plan is in the designated greenbelt, but the local plan, which has been in the system since 2018. But this one that's been in the system since 2018, through previous administrations even has highlighted these sites and is redrawing the boundaries of what that greenbelt is. And in a year when that's, or however long, when that is adopted, it's draft at the moment. When that is adopted, this will not be in the greenbelt, which makes it different to random any other site in terms of that. And the draft local plan in previous planning applications where this conversation has come up has been afforded weight, and I believe continues to be afforded weight. And some of this site is brownfield as well, is that right? Or like there's a bit of it that's kind of, it's not brownfield, but it's right on the edge of a really industrial area. So, I mean, obviously, I do think it's important we discuss the greenbelt element to it. I'm very content with the fact that I think if our officers are saying this classes as very special circumstances, then I'm content to take the officers at their word on this, particularly with the local councillor for Wheldrake saying Wheldrake residents and councillors understand the need for more houses in Wheldrake, and that the fact that this has been highlighted already within the draft local plan as a site. I think all that those tests about kind of reasonableness, I would say, I feel like have been met. And then it's up to whether we think that the kind of Section 106s and the mitigations and the things that are being sorted are enough to make this site appropriate. I'm really pleased that the condition was changed already about the sports funding being spent in Wheldrake. I think that's really important. I'm reassured by the conversations we've had from Highways about the bus funding actually looking at improving those bus services, because and perhaps increasing the quantity of buses. I think that was something that would be really important with this. I would probably say I'm leaning towards thinking this has clearly worked really hard with officers and with the developers to meet all of the tests. Although it's really annoying that the NHS won't reopen the GP surgery, but that's literally nothing we can do about that if they're not willing to do it. It doesn't seem like to me, doesn't seem like we can walk in and insist that they do something that is not something they're willing to do. And I would really like some cycle racks outside the shops, but
So I think Councillor Hollier had your hand up first to respond. I've then got Councillor Fisher and Councillor Widdowson.
Well, just to say, it is a draft plan. You can't treat the site as though it is already allocated. It still has to go through the process, and there are still outstanding objections to the site from members of the public. And I think, there's a certain degree of not, jumping the gun on that. The wording from the council's planning team there are unresolved objections in relation to the principle of development of the site, therefore limited weight should be applied to policies H1 and SS18. So I do think you have to be careful to not just assume because it's allocated in a draft plan, that means it's okay. It's still got to go through that process. It is still greenbelt, does still need to demonstrate very special circumstances. If you think it's done that, that's fine. But I wouldn't rely on oh, it's in the draft plan, so it's fine.
No, I'm relying on steers from the head of planning.
I think,
That would be useful.
just to be clear for everybody, you know, this is a planning balance. There's different amounts of weight can be afforded to different things. Councillor Hollier is absolutely right that the allocation is limited weight. 5.133, the 5-year housing land supply is significant weight. And the cumulative weight will determine which way people want to fall. And I think that's probably the way to consider it all. Councillor Fisher was next.
Thank you. I think it's a fairly well known, Councillor Sewell confirmed that I do not like greenbelt applications being approved, but you have to be pragmatic. There is simply not enough land around in York, which is brownfield, to provide our housing needs. So we have to be pragmatic. Some sites in the greenbelt have got to go. And yes, that's hard for me to vote for, but on this situation, I think I'm going to have to support this. The reason being, it is an allocated site. It's been through the planning inspectors. I don't think they've raised any objections to this site as an allocation. And consequently, it was suggested to me that if there are problems with the local plan, I don't think they're going to support this site being removed. Nevertheless, the devil is in the detail. The principle I support, I'm going to put my faith in what the agent said about putting in high quality sustainability measures. I think it's in the interests of developers now to do that. It may cost more money when you build it, but it cuts the actual cost of running the house down dramatically. It contributes, and in a cost of living crisis with heating at the rate it is, that is beneficial. So I really am putting my faith in the developers to up their game, and I think every developer should be doing this, not just the one here today, to put in much better standards of heating, insulation, and renewable resources. I take it there are issues around some of the transport aspects. I think the bus service is critical. If you're increasing the population of the village by my reckoning somewhere around 20%, you know, that opens up the possibility for more bus users if you provide the services. One of the public speakers mentioned the pub, which is struggling. Well, 20% more people in the village may lead to that pub being resurrected. So sometimes population increase is not actually a bad thing. It turns non-viable things into viable things. But the saddest thing for me, and I'll say this without a doubt, is the loss of the doctor's surgery. I've just had this in one of my villages in Stockton-on-the-Forest, where the doctor's surgery was shut, and it's causing chaos to some of the elderly people. If any way can be found to reopen that, I would very much support it rather than directing everyone to Elvington. And the final thing I say is I plead for the sports money to be used in Wheldrake. I've played at Wheldrake Cricket Club many times, and I love playing there because my bowling average dropped dramatically because I just get a stack of wickets because the ground is boggy. You know, it needs, you know, let's have sports resources concentrated in the village where the development is, please, because I think that's vital. I shall support this application, but as I say, I can understand why people are not doing it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Widdowson was next, and then I've seen Councillor Stewart as well.
Okay, some of the points have been made, so it is in the local plan, great, so that gives us a lot of parameters. What I would really like to see is more of the money that is being generated targeted at Wheldrake. I think that is a real missed opportunity, and that's the most succinct way that I can put it. That the global amount of money that is being generated from this development needs to be targeted at Wheldrake in the whole host of different areas that people have discussed. I'd also like to just bring up the point again, I feel like we're passing batons to each other about cycling. If you can improve a bus route that is going away from the site and across the whole city, wherever it's going, why can't you improve cycle routes that are without the development? The logic doesn't stack for both sides. So could we please have a look at the cycling infrastructure and the requirements across the village? And then finally, as I've said twice already, really look at the biodiversity. It's not good enough to say that we'll do something that's neutral. It's really not good enough when you look at the legislation and when you look at the ask of the people on that site and the people across the village. But yes, you can tell by my tone, I will be supporting it because it is in the local plan, whether it's been fully accepted or not. And after 40-something years, I would really like it to be accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I'm likely to support it, but with all the decisions I've made in my brief time on planning committee, it has genuinely been a sort of an evolving, flowing process. I've read papers and attended meetings, which hopefully shows that something is working right with planning. For me, I'm reminded of the application we adjudicated on last time about the front of the station. Now, obviously, the front of the station has nothing to do with 139 houses in rural Wheldrake, but what I think is the similarity is that then we had a professional officer report, and I thought, what extra expertise do I bring to that? Why do I say that officer is wrong? And I didn't say that officer was wrong. And here it's a very similar thing, that the officers weighed up the balance, looked at the negatives, looked at the positives, looked at the things like the draft local plan, the slight variation in the site, and come to a conclusion. And I'd love it if Councillor Vassie worked for Barrett and he was able to influence some of the things. I think all the points he's made are very sensible. I do have some doubt. I think the transport money that's in there is going to just drift away. A few years of improving the buses slightly, and then it's gone. I think it's a great shame we can't do more. So Councillor Merritt's point about the cycle track would definitely been good. I think Councillor Fisher's right that the Wheldrake doctor's practice would definitely be good. Would welcome to see that. And I absolutely believe that sports facilities in Wheldrake should be in Wheldrake. I don't know how true Councillor Fisher's claims about his bowling are, but I think that the difference between Wheldrake and Elvington is a long way away in practice, and things could be a lot further away. So I'm minded to support this, not on the basis it's perfect, but on the basis of where we are in the local plan, where the planning legislation is, leads me to go that way.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wishing to make a contribution? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this development does harm to the green belt, and I think it's not a sustainable location. It's not sustainable in terms of local essential services that are needed. It's not sustainable in terms of transport. We can't even be guaranteed that there'll be at least one bus service every day in the week. But in the planning balance, I think I'm minded towards approval because of the amount, the serious housing need that we have, and especially for affordable housing, and the amount that this would provide. And I think again in the planning balance, I'm satisfied with all the details in terms of appearance and drainage and all that sort of thing. So I'm minded for approval, but again, not feeling like it's a perfect application or that I'm particularly happy with it, just that in the planning balance, weighing it all up, yeah, I'm happy to approve it.
Okay, any further contributions? Not seeing any hands. I will just chuck out a couple of thoughts of my own. I think the evolving building regulations do mean that actually, even if approved, the building regulations could still be updated with the approval in place. So some of those aspirations that I think we all share around building as sustainably as possible may get picked up and caught up within that, because this is a site that will take some time to build out. So I'm optimistic from that point of view. I do, however, think that there is something we do as a city need to consider quite considerably carefully around building in car dependency. And I think that we've all acknowledged in various different ways that effectively this is building a development that will make it almost certain that most of the future occupants will need to have cars, and will need to have cars to be able to access some fairly basic services. I don't think one site can ever address all of that, but I think that's where, as a city, we need to have a conversation about how the city develops over time. I think it's a real pity that it wasn't possible to provide traveller pictures on site. I'm again heartened to hear that we are insisting on site provision of traveller sites on similar sized applications as they come forward now. And I think the general principle of not wanting to see developer obligations being met through commuted sum, whether it's for a traveller pitch or for an affordable house or whatever it might be, is a principle that we really need to push as a local planning authority. And finally, just to reiterate the point that I made right near the start around management fees, I do think it's again something that we need to be mindful of as a committee, but also developers mindful of when we're providing social housing on site and then expecting a management fee to be levied. That means that some of that, what might on paper be affordable housing, can become significantly less affordable if to live there costs you an additional fee on top of your rent. But all of those things considered, I think, you know, as has been said by a number of people, that the planning balance on this is such that we would be on shaky ground to not be accepting the officer recommendation. With that in mind, I'm happy then to move us into testing the officer recommendation. So looking for a proposer and a seconder on that recommendation. Councillor Merritt.
I'll move the recommendations with the additions and the amendments that were agreed earlier in the meeting on, and the additional informative.
Thank you. And Councillor Fisher.
I'll second it.
Councillor Widdowson, sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that we had put the points in about the hedgehogs and the swifts and all the other bits and pieces. Have they been captured?
Yeah.
Right, that's fine.
So I with a proposer and a seconder, I'll ask Becky just to talk us through exactly what we're going to vote on before we vote. So over to you.
Okay. So subject to the conditions in the report, the conditions in the additional information, but also to amend condition 18 to say minimum. That was in terms of the car club spaces. Remove peak from the bus services times contributions. This wasn't, as I said at the time, that doesn't mean it's going to secure it. It just means that it gives options there. There was also an informative for Swift, Bricks and Hedgehog. I can't remember exactly how we put it, but I put highways, that's it, Hedgehog highways as part of that. And then also for a discussion to happen with the applicant with regard to biodiversity net gain. Okay.
Okay, are we happy that that's captured everything? In which case, if I can see all of those who are in favour of that proposal by show of hands. And those against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that is everybody bar one in favour of that proposal. So therefore that is approved, subject to the amendments and conditions as were set out. There's nothing further on the agenda, no urgent business, and so therefore thank you everybody for your time.